The back seat smelled like leather and faint traces of expensive cologne. The low hum of the car engine filled the silence, blending with the occasional sound of the city passing by outside. The streetlights cast fleeting golden glows over our faces, shifting shadows as the car moved through the empty roads. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in a different taxi, heading home. My boyfriend was already on his way, sending me a text that I still hadn't answered. But I wasn't thinking about my boyfriend. I was thinking about the man sitting next to me. The driver. He wasn't just anyone. He was the kind of man who exuded confidence, who didn't just ask questions, he already knew the answers. His voice had been deep and smooth when he greeted me, something about the way he spoke making it sound like we had already met before. Maybe we had. Maybe that's why I hadn't hesitated when he offered me a ride instead of the cab I had been waiting for. Maybe that's why I had let my body sink into the seat, my skin prickling with awareness as he occasionally glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Maybe that's why, when his hand brushed over my thigh as he reached for the gear shift, I didn't move away. The touch was fleeting. Almost accidental. Almost. But I felt it. And I knew he did too. A slow breath left my lips, my fingers curling against the leather seat, my body suddenly too aware of the space between us, or rather, the lack of space. The streetlights flickered again, illuminating the sharp line of his jaw, the faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He didn't look at me when he spoke, but his voice was lower this time, quieter. "You're not saying anything." I swallowed. My throat was dry. "Should I be?" He exhaled a quiet chuckle, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "Most people don't get into a stranger's car at night." A pause. A flicker of a glance through the mirror. "But you're not most people." My stomach clenched. A slow heat curled in my chest, spreading lower, making me shift slightly in my seat. I should have laughed. I should have played it off as nothing. But I didn't. Because he was right. I wasn't like most people. Most people wouldn't let their driver take a turn that wasn't on the way home. Most people wouldn't sit in the back seat, breath unsteady, skin tingling, pulse racing with something far more dangerous than fear. And most people wouldn't let his hand slide back over her thigh, this time, slower. More intentional. I inhaled sharply. The car kept moving, but my world had already stopped. The silence in the car was thick, charged. The city outside blurred into streaks of light, but I barely noticed. I could only focus on one thing, his hand. It wasn't an accident this time. His fingers rested on my thigh, firm but unhurried, testing, waiting. I should have moved away. I should have said something, anything, to break the tension settling between us like a weighted breath. But I didn't. I sat there, my pulse hammering, my skin burning beneath his touch, my body frozen in something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement, but something dangerously close to both. His thumb traced a slow, deliberate line against my leg, barely pressing, just enough to let me feel it. My breath hitched. He smirked. "You're still quiet," he murmured, his voice low, smooth. "That a good thing or a bad thing?" I swallowed hard. "Depends." His hand moved slightly, fingers tightening for a brief second before releasing, dragging a slow path back toward the edge of my dress. "On what?" he asked. I exhaled shakily. "On whether or not I'm going to stop this." I didn't say it. Because I didn't know if I was going to stop this. His fingers inched higher. My breath stalled. "You're not stopping me." The words weren't a question. He already knew the answer. Neither of us was pretending anymore. The air in the car was thick, electric. My hands curled into my lap, my body too warm, too restless, too aware of him. I should have pushed his hand away. I should have asked him to take me home. Instead, I parted my legs just slightly. Barely enough to be noticeable. But enough that he felt it. Enough that he knew. A slow, knowing chuckle left his lips. His fingers flexed against my thigh, and I sucked in a sharp breath as he traced a slow, deliberate line upward, too slow, too confident, like he was enjoying making me wait. The car turned down a quiet road, a darker part of the city, where the buildings faded into empty lots and stretches of quiet streets. I should have asked where we were going. But I already knew. I wanted to know. My phone buzzed in my bag. I ignored it. Because I had already made my choice. The car slowed, turning onto a road I didn't recognize. The buildings had thinned out, replaced by the quiet stillness of empty streets and dimly lit parking lots. The city lights still flickered in the distance, but here, inside this car, in this moment, there was only us. And his hand. Still on me. Still moving, slow and deliberate, teasing just enough to remind me that this was happening because I was letting it. Because I wanted it. The engine purred as he pulled into a darkened lot, the glow of a single streetlight casting long shadows across the dashboard. The car rumbled to a stop. The silence that followed was deafening. His hand didn't move away. Neither did I. He exhaled softly, his fingers trailing one last slow line along my thigh before he pulled them back, only to turn off the ignition. The low hum of the car died, leaving nothing but the sound of our breathing and the distant murmur of the city beyond. I should have spoken. I should have asked him what we were doing here. But we both knew why we were here. I felt the shift before I saw it, his body turning slightly, his attention fully on me now, like he had been waiting for this moment since the second I got in the car. "Tell me to take you home," he murmured, voice low, steady. It was my way out. A final chance to end this before it became something I couldn't undo. I opened my mouth. And then I closed it. His smirk was slow, knowing. That's what I thought. The air between us felt charged, almost suffocating. My fingers twitched against my lap, my breath unsteady. I could have stopped this. But when he reached out, when his fingers brushed along my jaw, tilting my face toward him, forcing me to look at him, I didn't pull away. I let him. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but his grip was firm, steady. Testing me. Waiting for me to say no. I didn't. I parted my lips slightly, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering as his thumb traced along the curve of my jaw. "Last chance," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Say the word, and I'll drive you home." I swallowed hard. He was giving me an out. But I wasn't taking it. Instead, I leaned in. Just slightly. Just enough. His lips barely brushed against mine, the touch so faint, so teasing, that it wasn't even a kiss, just a promise. A warning. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't going home. Not yet. The second I leaned in, his restraint disappeared. His lips crashed against mine, no hesitation, no second-guessing, just heat, just hunger, just the undeniable weight of a choice I had already made. I gasped into his mouth, my fingers gripping the edge of the seat as his hands moved, tracing up my thigh, gripping my waist, pulling me closer even though there was barely any space between us. The car was too small, too warm, too full of something I couldn't stop now. His hands knew exactly where to go, how to touch me, how to make my skin burn beneath his fingertips. My breath hitched as he deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping over mine in a way that sent a sharp wave of heat through me. I shouldn't have been doing this. I knew that. But the way his hands slid beneath the fabric of my dress, the way his touch sent a shiver racing down my spine, the way my body pressed instinctively into his. I didn't care. His fingers tightened on my waist as he shifted, angling himself closer, pulling me deeper into this moment, into him. My head tilted back, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps as his lips moved lower, tracing the line of my jaw, my throat, his breath hot against my skin. I moaned softly, my fingers finding their way into his hair, pulling him closer when I should have been pushing him away. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it was happening. And I wanted it. The street light outside flickered, casting shifting shadows across the dashboard, illuminating the way his hands gripped me, the way his lips lingered against my collarbone, the way my body reacted to every single thing he did. The city outside didn't exist anymore. My boyfriend, my relationship, the version of me that would have said no. None of it existed. Not here. Not now. His fingers slid higher, his lips pressing against mine again, harder this time, more demanding. I let out a shaky breath, my hands moving over his chest, down his arms, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. This was reckless. This was dangerous. But as I melted against him, as my body responded without hesitation, as my mind blurred with nothing but him, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't stopping. The car felt smaller now. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something I couldn't ignore. My body burned beneath